Hello, class. Color. Color is one of the most important elements of art, and we're going to try to cover it, even though it's a really large topic. In fact, in class, we're probably going to take about 2, maybe even 3 weeks just to talk about color. So, first of all, what is color, right? A lot of theorists have come up with different ideas about what color is, but most scientists can prove that color is a reflection of energy. And what we see is sort of the response or the bounce back of light hitting an object and then getting into our eye, right? Our eye then makes some sense of it and we get color. Our brain sort of figures out like this wavelength produces this color, and our mind makes up the rest of it. Right? We start creating patterns in our brain that tell us these are the colors that we see, and then we put names to those colors, and that way we can all talk about the same wavelength in in the same respect. So think about X-rays, for example. We don't see X-rays in our daily life, but X-rays exist. How do we know this? Well, if we use the right kind of tools, we can take a picture of the inside of your body. If you've ever broken an arm or any bones, you have seen the X-ray and you can see inside of your body, right? It's light that penetrates through the density in your skin and whatnot, and it can see through you. There's also gamma rays and ultraviolet rays, which our eye does not see. So there are many other wavelengths beyond the ones that our eyes can see. So again, color is the representation of energy bouncing off of an object and getting into our eye. And scientists have been able to prove this, and we know that you know light in color for artists basically deals with about 12 major colors. Right. So here is a spectrum, a color spectrum. It's a crystal that takes a white ray of light and refracts it into many different colors. This is 1665. Isaac Newton came up with this, and he started sort of analyzing the refraction of all of these colors. And then he started putting this into a color wheel. So right about 1800s, we start getting what we know today as the color wheel. But I want you to note that there is a difference between the way science and television sees light and the way that art and painting sees light and color, right? So I'm going to talk about the color wheel for artists. And in your science class and your chemistry classes, you're going to get a different understanding of color through light. So just know that there's a difference. It doesn't mean that they're wrong. It just means that science has a different approach to it, and painting, because we only have so many paint colors, we have to approach it a different way. So neither one is right or wrong. Hue, intensity, and value make up color. Hue, intensity, and value make up color. So we're going to talk about these three characteristics of color. So hue, intensity, and value. So let's just say you have a conversation with your friend over the phone and you can't take a picture of the color shirt that you want. But you have an idea of what the color looks like, and so you're going to have to describe the color to your friend. How would you describe it? First, you would probably talk about the hue. you would probably say it's blue, or you would say it's red or orange or green. Any name of a giant family of colors. Now, are all reds the same? Are all blues the same? No, they're not. In fact, you might have the same shirt from the same factory that looks different because people have washed it so many times, or maybe it's been in the sun, and so the color has changed. But you would first start to describe the color as a hue, a family of colors. Then you would describe how saturated the color is. Is it a bright blue? Is it a dull kind of blue? Is it a baby blue? What kind of blue is it? And then you would talk about value. Is it really, really dark, or is it really, really light? And that's either adding black or white. So we already talk about color in the way that artists talk about it. We just have to define it a little bit more. Okay, so again, hue, Hue, is the family of colors. And I want you to think of the color wheel. Saturation, intensity, and chroma all kind of mean the same things. And in different software programs like Adobe Photoshop or in Sketchbook, you will see these words are interchanged a little bit. Also, depending on the book, many books don't differentiate, but these three words mean about the same. So you can also think of this as the purity of color. How pure is the color? I always think of saturation as like, what is the concentration of that molecule in that color? For example, if I have red right out of the tube of paint, it's going to be high intensity, high saturation, a lot of pigment goes into that color. But as soon as I add something to it, whether it's white or black or gray or another color, or I add water, that saturation is diluted. So you can think of it as the purity of the color when we're talking about saturation or intensity or chroma. And then value. We've talked about value before as the range from light to dark, and it's either adding black or adding white or even adding gray to a color. Okay, so let's talk about hue in a little more depth. Hue has major families of colors, and we'll talk about primaries, secondaries, and tertiary colors, which you've probably already heard of in like elementary school or even in kindergarten. But there's a question about, are black and white colors? And yes, they are colors in the way that you and I talk about them in day-to-day life. But when we're talking about like the real definition of them, white and black are not really colors. They are representations of value, right? So you can also think about it this way: white is the absence of color, and black is the concentration of all of the colors mixed together when we're painting. In science, they're a little different, but they're not colors. So you wouldn't say white is a hue or black is a hue, right? You would just say black and white are values. And again, here's the value scale showing the range from light to dark. So a tint is adding white to a color. Just like we do with paint, we want to create a lighter color for, a room. You want to paint it kind of light, you would add white. And so you're creating a tint of a color. You can also think of these as pastel type colors, very light, low intensity colors. And shade would be to add black to a color, right? So you would have like midnight blue is a shade of blue, or you would say burgundy, dark, deep burgundy, cherry dark type of plum type color would be a shade of violet or red violet, right? So shade is adding black. One thing about adding black when we're painting, we don't just want to add a bunch of black to make everything look like a shadow, right? That there's a difference between the color of a shadow and just adding black. There's no connection there. You should really look at shadows as another color, not necessarily just adding black. So we'll talk about that more as we begin to paint. So black, white, and gray are different kinds of colors, and you're shooting the color around depending on what you want, the result that you want, right? So if you don't want necessarily a deep dark shade, you would just add gray, and that would be a tone. A gray is a tone of a color. Black is adding a shade, or shade is adding black to a color, and then tint is adding white to a color. So tint, shade, and tone. Tone is adding gray to a color. Right, so let's just say all you had was one color and you were supposed to create a monochromatic painting. Mono, the prefix mono means one. So think of monotheism, the belief in one God, or monoculture, which is one kind of plant repeated over and over again, right? Um, so mono, one color, and chroma is color. So one color. This is what it would look like. You're adding either black or white, or you're adding water to the watercolor here to create intensity and brightness in the colors here. So that's monochromatic, one color. The opposite of that would be polychromatic. So intensity, again, just to get into a little bit more detail, intensity is the brightness or the dullness of a color. You can also think of this as the concentration of a pigment of color and the intensity of that pigment of color. Anytime you add gray or white or black to it, or you dilute it somehow with water, it's going to become more transparent, and so therefore the intensity is going to come down. So we speak of color sometimes in high or low intensity, purity, and those kinds of terms. So again, poly meaning many, right? Polytheism, the belief in many gods, or um, polycultural, maybe many different cultures, right? Is polychromatic. So polychroma again means color. So polychromatic means many colors. And so I think of coral reefs, which sadly are disappearing in our planet. Coral reefs give us a perfect example of high intensity, great range of colors. And so polychromatic, this would be a great example of polychromatic colors. All right, so let's get into the color wheel a little bit more. Primary colors are going to be red, yellow, and blue. And I usually think of these as the sort of the mother colors. If all I had was red, yellow, and blue, I could still make all of the other colors. Just mix them, right? And from the primaries, we can get the secondary colors. Secondary colors are green, orange, and violet, and these are created, and they're called secondary because they're created from the primary color. So if I mix blue and yellow, I get green. If I mix yellow and red, I get orange. If I mix red and blue, I get violet, not purple, violet. So violet is always supposed to be darker than red and darker than blue, and it's supposed to be a 50-50 mix. The reason we don't say purple is because purple is actually a derivative of violet. It's like, and the reason is money. It takes a lot of money to purchase red and a lot of money to purchase blue. So if you mix the two, you would have to multiply the price. It would be more expensive. But companies have figured out, well, we're just going to add white. And since we can't call it violet, we're going to call it purple. So just know that true violet is more intense and more rich of a color than just red or blue, right? If it looks like it's got some white in it, it's purple. So in the test for the class, you have to say secondary colors are green, orange, and violet, not purple. All right, so tertiary colors fit in between the primaries and the secondaries. They always have a primary first name and they have a secondary second name. So we have red orange, red violet, blue green, yellow green, and yellow orange. So just think about these as like the third tier of colors, more refined colors. And there's six of these, right? There's three secondaries, there's three primaries, and all of the colors can be created with just the three, red, yellow, and blue, and you'll have the whole spectrum. Remember, the spectrum is refracted light. So here's a more clear picture of the color wheel, right? You have your primaries in the middle. Around the primaries, we have the secondaries, which are created by mixing the two primaries. And then tertiary colors are all the ones that fit in between. Okay. Now, what happens if we start mixing these colors together, right? There's a lot of different kinds of combinations that you can create and have fun with. Um, One of the most interesting relationships of colors is mixing colors that are across from each other on the color wheel, and you get neutral colors. So, for example, if I mix yellow and violet, I get a neutral color, like a muddy brown type of color. If I mix green and red, I get the same muddy brown type colors. So think of brown as a mixture of the complementaries. Complementaries are colors that are directly across from each other on the color wheel. Complementary colors are directly across from each other on the color wheel. Blue and orange, red green, yellow violet, these are the complementary pairs. So one of the interesting things in nature is that nature always kind of deals with energy. And I think of like a pepper, for example, in this video, there's a time lapse of a pepper becoming more and more bright as it that is as it's more fresh. But as soon as it starts to lose its energy or its life, it starts to become more sort of neutral in color and more close to brown. So I feel like that's a super interesting way of looking at um, color is as an energy, right? And think of the way you have a relationship with color. Some of you are really used to bright colors, like even on your face, like your makeup and stuff. Um, you have a lot of color on your face and red lipstick and blue shadow and whatever else you do with your hair. You paint it blue and all kinds of stuff. And that's an energy that you put out into the world. Me, I'm more like blues and grays, and that's kind of it, right? That I kind of stick to blue, gray, black, white, and I don't really step out of the comfort zone for me. Um, so think about your own relationship with color and in your life, right? Does that come from the way your family is? Are they all very loud and just very outgoing and people type um, personalities, or are they more, sort of low key, less color, less intensity, a little more quiet? So think about your own relationship with color.